right, welcome to lesson 3.4b. In this video, we're going to talk about the quantum mechanics atomic model, also known as the Heisenberg model. So this is currently our most accurate model of the atom, and it includes how the electrons behave in waves, right? So mainly what this model shows is how the electrons are moving, right? And the Bohr model does do that, but not as accurately as the quantum atomic model, right? So I have two of these models side by side for comparison. So you'll notice that the first ring, these two electrons are in red. And in the first ring in the quantum atomic model, they're also moving as electrons in a ring or a sphere. But since atoms are 3D, really they're moving in a sphere like this one. So this is a 3D model. If you can imagine where the nucleus is where all these axes meet. And if I play the video, here there's going to be two electrons shown as these two electrons orbiting in this ring and these two electrons orbiting in this ring. So far, the Bohr model and the quantum atomic model are pretty much the same. And if I add two more electrons, represented by the dark green electrons in this Bohr model and this quantum atomic model, they're still moving in a spherical shape, but slightly farther away from the nucleus. But currently, these two models are still very similar. But if I look at the next two electrons, you'll notice that the next two electrons, represented by orange in the Bohr model and orange in this quantum atomic model, that they're no longer moving in rings. They're moving in this kind of like infinity loop shape, right? Fitted here. So when they're moving in these different shapes that aren't a perfect circle, right, we call those shapes P. So there are also different other shapes, right? So S shape is the sphere shape, P shape is this infinity shape. There's also a shape called D, like the letter D as in dog, where it looks like the P shape but with a donut hole around it, so on and so forth, right? So all these shapes continue throughout. So in the P shapes, we can fit 6, and then we get to our third ring eventually. So in our third ring, we move back into the S shape, and then the cycle kind of repeats, so on and so forth, right? So here's an example of a D shape, right? And if you notice, every single time as we go through each of these shapes will fit about 2 electrons each, right? So this is just to give you a general idea of what the quantum atomic model looks like. But let's talk about how do we actually like draw this? Because this would be extremely messy on a two-dimensional sheet of paper. Well, we don't actually draw the quantum mechanics model. We draw a written form using numbers and letters to describe how the electrons are moving. So rather than drawing the model, we do something called electron configuration. An electron configuration is a way that we write words and numbers to describe how the electrons are moving. So let me draw you the Bohr model of carbon, and I'll draw you the quantum mechanics or the quantum atomic model of carbon, and then I'll show you how it compares to the electron configuration. And in the next slide, we'll do an example problem of how to solve this. Right. So just as a reminder, carbon has 6 protons and 6 electrons, as stated by the atomic number. Whoops, did not mean to do that. So here, if we did the Bohr model, our protons would be 6, neutrons would be 6. Here's our nucleus, our first energy level. We can fit 2 electrons. And in the next one, we can fit 4, right? Totaling up to 6 electrons. If we did this in the quantum mechanics model, it would look sort of similar. So our first ring or energy level will have 2 electrons. And in the second ring, we'll have another 2 moving in that spherical shape, as mentioned before. Right? And the next 2 will actually be moving in a different shape. Right? So to note that, the next 2 electrons will be moving in this shape. And as we layer on this, it gets messier and messier. So rather than drawing this, let me show you what electron configuration looks like. And here in the image to the right, it basically describes what each number, letter, and exponent represents, right? But since I've color-coded this, let me describe what it means. So here in my first ring in red, this is my first energy level. So this first number that you write describes your shell or energy level or ring. In the first ring, I have 2 electrons moving in an S shape or the spherical shape, right? And because I have 2 electrons, this is what this 2 means. So this number 1 represents my shell or energy level or the ring that I'm in. The letter describes the shape that the electrons are moving in. And then the exponent describes how many electrons do you have moving in this energy level in this specific shape, right? Okay, so we're done describing the next 2 electrons. The next 2 electrons will be in blue, so can you guess what the electron configuration to describe the electrons in blue would be? You can go ahead and pause this video and then unpause when you're ready. So the blue electrons are in the second ring, and they're moving in an S shape or a spherical shape still, right? And there are 2 electrons moving in this shape, so 2s exponent 2. What about these electrons in green? Well, we're still in the second ring. So here, 2, but this time they're moving in a different shape. They're not moving in a spherical shape. They're moving like one of these. So we call that P. And how many electrons do you have moving in this shape? Well, you have 2. So 2p2. So this whole thing describes the electron configuration for the quantum atomic model of carbon. So for this model, we now know how the electrons are moving, and we know the shape that they're moving in, which energy level they are, and how many electrons there are total, right? So 2, 4, 6 electrons. These 2 are moving in an S shape. This one is moving in a P shape. These 2 electrons are in the second ring, as denoted by the large 2. These 2 electrons are moving in the first ring. So let's do some practice on the next slide.